Another surprise perhaps as BMW persist with the ATS team despite them failing to conjure a single point out of the championship-winning engines. Presumably the good offices of driver Manfred Winkelhock were instrumental, and certainly he seems to have been about the only person at the team who got on reasonably well with volatile owner Günther Schmidt. There's a new car, the Gustav Brunner Pen D7, and once again BMW are supplying the same M1213 flat-4 engine that Brabham get. Pirelli tyres replace Goodyear's, which may not be a positive move, but the car's been quick in testing, and if they can just nail down the reliability, they could still do well. Winkelhock's muscular driving style drew some criticisms during 1983, but it also garnered him compliments, and it was clear that he was a much better driver than the ATS was allowing him to show. He usually qualified well, but the car was simply not reliable. He only finished 2 races all season, and only one with no technical problems. When the car was on the road, Winkelhock was usually found running among or just behind the top teams, which made it all the more frustrating for Manfred and his engineers when he was inevitably seen pulling off with something broken a few laps later. A season of deep frustration for Renault in 1983 had seen them look the class of the field, only to end up with just another entry in their list of disappointing failures, at least by the high standards they set themselves. Things came to a head at the end of 1983 with Prost and Cheever both out. In come Patrick Tambay and Derek Warwick. Both drivers have become popular in the paddock and among journalists in the last few years, and they're already being referred to as Team Nice. But both are also excellent drivers with much to prove at their new team. They will be driving the RE50, an updated version of last year's RE40, with the new evolution of the Renault Gordini turbo engine in the back, and the team are keen to show that they don't need Prost to succeed. There were many in the Grand Prix fraternity who felt that Tambay had been badly treated by Ferrari at the end of 1983, both in his release from the team, after having done so much better than expected, and in the manner of its announcement. However, he had certainly proved his ability in the Scarlet car, and he was as delighted at the chance to drive for the Premier French team as they were to have a proven race winner, and a good development driver, on board. He and Warwick already seem to be getting on famously, which is certainly an improvement on the prickly Prost-Arnoux relationship. Having stuck with the little Toleman team from its entry into F1 in 1981, Warwick had proved himself a fine driver over and over, only for the car to let him down. When it finally all seemed to come together for Toleman at the end of 1983, it was Warwick who made the most of things to record 4 consecutive points finishes. He was hot property at the end of 1983, and Renault would hope that his reputation was well founded and that he had the hunger to succeed and win races. After a year spent living hand-to-mouth on the sponsorship front, some welcome stability for Arrows with a full-year deal from Barclay Cigarettes, Nordica Ski Equipment and Worth Tools and Components. There's continuity in drivers too, with Sura and Boutsen, both undoubtedly talented, retained and hoping for better things. The team begin the year with the A6 chassis and Ford Cosworth engine left over from 1983, but a new chassis and BMW turbo power are promised for the start of the European season. The Swiss driver had seldom caught the eye in 1983, but outside the TV coverage had established himself as a true racer, taking the sluggish but solid A6 by the scruff of its neck and wrestling it into the points 4 times. He outdrove Alan Jones when he reappeared, and only bumping into Derek Warwick kept him off the podium in Monaco. When the season moved to the faster circuits, he simply wasn't able to keep up, but he and Boutsen kept their cars running and brought them home, which is about all that could be asked. Boutsen had been unfortunate on a number of levels in 1983, unfortunate in being dropped by Spirit, then unable to finance a Tyrrell drive before finally pitching up at Arrows just in time for his home race. He immediately impressed and was again unfortunate in not being able to parlay his evident skill into a points finish, twice coming home 7th and twice 9th. As with Sura, he did all that could be asked of him and did so just as well as his more experienced teammate. With a full season to go at, he could do well in 1984. The Toleman team had finally seen a reward at the end of 1983 for all their hard work since 1981, with the odd-looking TG183 proving first fast and then eventually reliable. Derek Warwick was always going to be poached by one of the big boys sooner or later though, and with title sponsor Candy also leaving and no requirement for an Italian in car number 2, the underwhelming Giacomelli was also out on his ear. In comes new sponsor Segafredo, though their logos will still be on the old car until a new TG184 is ready, and 2 South American drivers, in the shape of reigning British F3 champion Ayrton Senna and likeable, and rich, Venezuelan Johnny Cecotto, a well-heeled refugee from the demise of Theodore. The young Brazilian had begun his driving career early, driving a Jeep around his family's farm at age 7, and by 13 he was driving a go-kart built by his father in competitions at the nearby Interlagos circuit. He won the South American Kart Championships in 1977, moving to Britain in 1981 to drive in Formula Ford 1600. In 1981 he won 2 championships, but had decided to return to Brazil and go into the family business, before being tempted into Formula Ford 2000 by means of a £10,000 cheque. He repaid the money by taking the championship in 1982 under his mother's maiden name Senna, as Da Silva is such a common name in Brazil, and moved into Formula 3 with West Surrey Racing. He took the British F3 title in his debut season after a season-long battle with Martin Brundle of Eddie Jordan Racing, and was already hot property by the end of the year, having had tests with teams including Williams, Brabham and Lotus, but only Toleman were willing to give him a race drive rather than a testing or development berth. Although Cecotto had only managed 1 point during 1983, this was more to do with the problems surrounding the Theodore team than his talent. In fact, early in the year, when Theodore were looking like a decent proposition, Cecotto rose to the challenge, taking a point on only his second start at Long Beach. While he and Roberto Guerrero were both pay drivers, and Cecotto's role at Toleman would largely be to pay Senna's salary, Cecotto showed some flashes of talent when the car let him, which wasn't very often, especially as the season went on. The Little Spirit team could feel rather ill-served by Honda, who had encouraged them to make the step up into F1, only to drop them like a hot potato after just 6 races in favour of Frank Williams' money. However, the ex-McLaren boys in charge are made of sterner stuff, and cut back to just 15 staff and having to let loyal Stefan Johansson go, they arranged a supply of Hart straight 4 turbos. Team boss Gordon Coppock even persuaded his old McLaren driver Emerson Fittipaldi to test the car in pre-season, with a view to making an unlikely F1 comeback, but Emo wasn't convinced. Wealthy Italian Fulvio Balabio was also slated to drive, with sponsorship from Disney among others, hence the Mickey Mouse logo on the test car, but was denied a super licence due to a relative lack of junior results. So in the end, the sole entry would be driven by Mauro Baldi, who had been let go by Alfa Romeo. Baldi had had a mixed season in 1983, usually beaten by teammate Andrea de Cesaris, but capable of driving well on occasion, as shown with his 2 point-scoring finishes. He probably wasn't the best driver out there, but brought much-needed funding to the Spirit team and was unlikely to disgrace himself. Steady, unspectacular and dependable, rather than fast. But that's really what the team in Spirit's position need, rather than a keen young hotshot who'll either crash the car or drive it to bits. All change at Alfa Romeo after yet another disappointing season. Marlboro Italia finally gave up on a bad job and pulled out, with Andrea de Cesaris following his bread and butter out of the door. Instead, Italian fashion giants Benetton switched their allegiance from Tyrrell to the Milan-based team, giving the cars a new look of red and green, to the delight of commentators everywhere who will finally be able to tell them apart from the McLarens. A new chassis, the 184T, houses that big, thirsty V8 turbo, among worries that the refuelling ban will hit the team hard. The cars will be driven by Riccardo Patrese and Eddie Cheever, not a bad pairing. The two both have points to prove after being dropped by their teams. Patrese's stock had diminished during 1983, his hard driving style leading to too many retirements, exacerbated by the team's favouring of Piquet. By the time he recorded his second career win, and only his second points finish of the season at Kyalami, the damage was done and Patrese was on his way. He would be hoping that the move to Alfa Romeo would allow him to kick-start his career and show his undoubted quality, even if that was only by making the best of a bad job. Poor Fast Eddie was a largely blameless victim of Renault's implosion in the 1983 season. He always seemed to be the one with the technical problems, always the one with the engine failures. He didn't seem at his best in qualifying, which didn't help. He frequently left himself with too much to do on race days, but he never let his racing instincts desert him, even when his good luck did. Shown the door before the end of the season, the man brought up in Rome must have been delighted to sign for one of the great names of Italian motorsport, but with Alfa Romeo's previous record he would need all of his speed and sunny disposition. The little Osella team had done what they needed to do in 1983, persuading the Alfa Romeo concern that it was worth supplying them with engines, even if that did mean the overweight, underpowered and outdated V12s. For 1984, Alfa had agreed to upgrade them to the same V8 turbos they were using in the factory team, and Tony Southgate has drawn up a new chassis for it, heavily inspired by the 1983 Alfa Romeo 183T chassis. To offset the costs, a single car will be entered for Pier Carlo Cinzani, though it was hoped to enter a second car for Austrian test driver Joe Gartner later in the season if finances allowed. The affable Italian hadn't had the best of seasons in the first half of 1983, as number one driver status put him in the Alfa Romeo powered car before his teammate Corrado Fabi, and he therefore took the brunt of the teething troubles. Nonetheless, he remained cheerful, professional and well-mannered on the track while being lapped, unlike his predecessor in the car, Jean-Pierre Jarier, and his times improved towards the end of the season. Hopefully his perseverance and loyalty will be rewarded with a better car and better fortune in 1984. The Ligier team continues to try and find the formula for success that keeps eluding them after a dismal 1983. Guy Ligier's political connections with French President Mitterrand have helped them, with new sponsorship from State Lottery, which brings an unfamiliar splash of red to the cars, and Renault turbo engines, the same ones as the Works Renault and Lotus teams. With Jarier retiring and Boesel unable to find sponsorship, it's a new driver lineup too. Andrea de Cesaris joins his third F1 team and is partnered by French rookie François Hinault. Like his compatriot and fellow rookie Philippe Alliot, François Hinault came from a well-off family but didn't discover his vocation in racing until later in life. Hinault completed his military service, like Alliot, in an elite regiment, then got the racing bug while a student. He began racing in Formula Renault in 1980 and moved into Formula 3 just 2 years later. He finished third in the championship in his first season and went one better in 1983, taking the title race to the wire and just losing out to Michel Ferté despite winning 5 races. His government connections via his parents' transportation business saw him fast-tracked into Formula 1 with Ligier, a surprising signing, but his rise had been meteoric and he might just be a star in the making. The headstrong Italian had matured in his 2 years at Alfa Romeo and turned in some excellent performances whenever his sluggish car had allowed him to. He still made errors, but had improved vastly on his antics with McLaren in 1981, and nowhere was this more clearly shown than at Spa, where he took pole and led for the first half of the race, and could have won if his team hadn't botched the pit stop. So far his career had been bankrolled by Marlboro Italia thanks to family connections, but they don't seem to have pressed him on Ligier, and he would after all take to the track festooned in Gitane logos. It seems Guy Ligier may actually have hired him on merit. Ferrari could look back with satisfaction on 2 consecutive Constructors' Championships, but the driver's title still eludes them, despite the best efforts in 1983 of Tambay and Arnoux. The 2 Frenchmen had proved evenly matched over the season as a whole, but it took Arnoux the first half of the season just to find his feet, and at the halfway stage he was openly being talked about as a candidate for an early sacking. However, he came back fighting towards the end of the season, and it was Tambay that was unceremoniously dumped in favour of the new signing Alboreto. Several within the team are known to be unhappy with this decision, as Tambay's testing and development input was highly valued, and neither Arnoux nor Alboreto have shown such aptitude. However, with a new 126C4 chassis ready from the get-go, the team believe they can finally take that extra step for the first time since 1979. Despite the win in Detroit, Alboreto was anonymous for much of 1983 as his Tyrrell slipped further back in the field, and he often gave the impression of seeing out his contract with a 1984 drive already assured. That said, even in the unique circumstances of Detroit, you don't win in a Tyrrell without really trying, and his promise remains undimmed. Alboreto is the first Italian Ferrari driver since Arturo Mazzario in 1973, and his popularity with the fans is already assured before he so much as turns a wheel, but he will need to ensure he keeps them on side with his performances. The Frenchman had a troubled start to the 1983 season following his move from Renault, but following a breakthrough win in Canada he never looked back, trading race wins with Prost to push his rival and former teammate hard for the title. Ultimately, mechanical reliability scuppered his season in the final 2 races, as it had for Tambay, but he went into the last race still with a mathematical chance of winning, which was impressive given his early season form. Not everyone will be happy that it was he and not Tambay who had retained the seat though, and he'll have to prove them wrong in 1984.